Hello my dear friends, you're on the Military Summary channel and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 11th of February of 2024. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, chill locations, so let's start. And as usual as these days we are going to start with Avdiivka direction. Very interesting situation continued developing in this area. If you remember, during the previous day, let's say on the 10th of February, we had significant updates, significant reports about the further Russian progress in the central part of the stronghold. The Russians were moving in direction of Brivno, and we were talking about this, that currently there were clashes for this territory. We were talking about supply roads in the previous video. Also, we were talking about the further Russian progress from the bus station to the gas stations in this area, and that the Russians were storming the biggest stronghold in this area in the fields between the gas station and the bus station. Also, we were talking about additional Russian progress along the railways in direction of the central part and the railway station, so this one, and that the Russians, as a result of attack, managed to answer the Sельхозтехники Street, this one. And we had a lot of updates, we had a lot of maps, a lot of updates, a lot of different mappers and so on. And after that we see a pause. And this is probably the most interesting. We see the pause and we don't see any reports at all. And this is very weird and very strange, why we stop receiving any updates, any reports about the further progress of the clashes for Avdiivka. For a few options, the easiest and the simplest, let's say, explanation is that the Russians is currently, it's a weekend, Sunday, neither the Russians nor the Ukrainians, I mean talking about the journalists and so on, are on the line of combat contact, so that's why they are not publishing information. But tomorrow on Monday, we're gonna receive more updates about the progress of Sunday. Very likely this is like the first and the most simplest, easiest solution and explanation. The second explanation is that the Ukrainians managed to fulfill the combat line of combat contact with the fresh forces, and that currently there are very heavy clashes between Russian assault troopers and the Ukrainian forces along this line with the purpose to restore control, to save control over the main, let's say, area industrial AF, and this is the reason why we stop receiving any updates. There are currently very heavy clashes between Russian armed forces and the fresh Ukrainian reinforcements that have just arrived. Because we just discussed the video, from the Ukrainian sources about this reinforcement. We were talking about their helmets, they're shining. If there was a sun, probably we got blind under the shine of these helmets. A very interesting video, probably work of propaganda. But from the other side, the Ukrainian military authorities, one by one after another, confirms about their plans not to give up Avdiivka and to fight till, for Avdiivka for the last Ukrainian, or something like this. And you know, there are a few interesting things about the battle for Avdiivka and so on. The thing is that more military experts are saying that battle for Avdiivka is becoming the same as battle for Bakhmut. So what are they saying? There are a few things that are common between these two battles. The first one, that this is political battle. This is like a attempt from Zelensky to control as long as possible the city, not to fall, not to step back, not to give up, and not to allow Putin to win the present elections based on this, let's say, victory for Avdiivka. This is the first reason. And the second common thing between the battle for Bakhmut and the battle for Avdiivka is that both defense battles, were under control and under responsibilities of Syrsky. So Syrsky, currently general in the head of Ukraine army, commander-in-chief, he used to be just a general of infantry army. He was responsible for defense of Bakhmut, and now he's responsible for defense of Avdiivka. And there is important thing, because if there are a lot of so common things, if you remember, during the battle for Bakhmut, Syrsky tried at the final stage of battle to implement releasing or deblocking operation. What does it mean, deblocking operation? At some point of Bakhmut battle, a lot of Ukrainian sources, soldiers and forces were encircled and got enclosed in Bakhmut, so that's why it was a very big need to release those forces and to evacuate as many as possible. And now more and more sources are talking about the same story, that Syrsky is going to make another release operation. So, but it's very important to understand what does it mean, release operation. For example, when talking about Bakhmut, the Ukrainians were attacking not inside of the central part of Bakhmut, inside of citadel, and trying to attack from city inside to spread and restore positions in the city. because a lot of resources, military experts are saying that Ukrainians will try to send forces to, let's say, ninth quarter, to, I don't know, to industrial Ave, to stabilize area, and from this perspective to attack the Russians in the central part with a very big amount of soldiers and forces. So this is like the plan according to many military experts. But when talking about Syrsky and about a lot of common things, since Syrsky, when he was trying to conduct the release Bakhmut operation, he was attacking the flanks. He was attacking Dubova, Vasilivka, Khromovo, Yagidna, trying to restore control over 0506 road and to give possibilities for evacuation. And now I believe that he's going to do the same. He will attack the flanks. But there are two flanks. The first one flank is Vadiana Opotne. And of course, there are very big chances that Ukrainians will try to attack from Severna and Toninka to the south, trying to increase the flank, trying to release the strongholds like this one, to attack Vadiana, to restore control. And of course, it will give some time. The Ukrainians will be able to win some time by, let's say, reestablishing control over Vadiana and Opotne. But highly unlikely the Ukrainians are going to use this road, because by attacking in direction of Vadiana and Opotne, it's the same as you attack Donets itself. You're going to attack towards the positions that under complete artillery control, and the Ukrainians, first of all, don't have any they have a lot of problems with artillery, with long-range artillery, with HIMARS. We stop receiving any videos of this type of weapon use at all, and to attack Vadiana means that the Russians will attack the Ukrainian forces somewhere from behind of Donetsk, and the Ukrainians will not have any possibilities to get the Russian artillery forces. So to attack the southern flank is very unlikely operation from the Ukrainian side. But when talking about Krasnogorovka, this is the perfect, let's say, option for the Ukrainians to release Avdiivka. We discussed this operation for many times. During the previous 4 months, the Russians were doing one thing. They were trying to improve their positions along the railways. As a result of previous offensive operations, the Russians managed to establish control over complete railways from chemical plant to Novomykhailivka and Novomykhailivka. During the previous months, the Russians were trying to reinforce this area. Of course, the Russians would have better chances if they were able to establish during the previous months the control over the cities like Stepova, Berdichi, or something like this. But the Russians haven't managed to penetrate the Ukrainian defense belt, so they have what they have, and they base their defense on this. And now we understand that very likely the Ukrainians will try to counterattack the Russians in Krasnogorovka. This is like in Syrsky style. This is his, let's say, release operation, attack towards the flank. And the question is what the Ukrainians are trying and want to achieve by this attack. By taking Krasnogorovka, if for some magic situation, for some magic reason, the Ukrainians are able to attack and penetrate the Russian defense belt and to somehow establish Krasnogorovka, of course we understand that those Russian forces who were trying to create a cauldron for the Ukrainians on the south would appear in a cauldron themselves, because the main supply roads that goes from Veselya to from Kamyanka, Veselya to the south will be cut off by the Ukrainians, and the Russian forces who are currently located in the central part, in the bus station, in the vicinity of the lake, would be encircled by the Ukrainians. So this is going to be the Russian attempt to create a cauldron will turn to a cauldron for themselves. Of course, we need to understand that the Russians understand the risk, they understand this operation, they understand that the situation on the northern flank is so-so, and currently the Russians are trying to improve their positions and they're trying to avoid this cauldron operation. So we might say, but what the Russians are doing to avoid this critical situation and not to get in a cauldron themselves? The thing is that when talking about the central part of Avdiivka, when talking about attacks in Avdiivka, there are a few directions. The first one we have already discussed. The Russians are trying to attack using the broad front line attack in direction of industrial Ave, and the main purpose of this attack is to establish control at least over this territory, which will allow the Russians to cut completely the northern part of Avdiivka from the southern part of Avdiivka, and this is going to be the end. This is going to be 100% cauldron for a few thousand of Ukrainian soldiers. There are more than 5 or maybe 6,000-7,000 soldiers that located in the ninth quarter, in the central part, southern part, and the eastern part of Avdiivka. So this is the separate Russian groups who has some objectives, goals, and they're trying to complete them, and they don't care about the other Russian operations. But when talking about another Russian operation that currently takes place in Avdiivka, I believe that you mentioned that a lot of sources reported about the further Russian progress along this beach, along Donetsk beach, along this lake, and that the Russians are moving something like this. They're moving along this area, and they have also significant progress exactly along this road of attack. So the question is, what is the purpose of these movements? Why the Russians are not moving to the south, to the ninth quarter, but they're trying to move to the east? And the problem is, and the main thing is that the victory of Avdiivka in the current configuration of the front line depends not on the battle for the west, for this area. This is very important, but when talking about the Ukrainian release operation, the Russian plan can be collapsed, and this is going to be from victory, the situation can be turned into disaster. And the Russians understand this because this supply line is very important, and this is the only supply line that the Russians have, that the Russian forces in central Avdiivka has. So imagine yourself, the entire offensive operation, the entire cauldron operation from the Russian side relies just on one sector, the road through Veselaya, this one, Veselaya, and then to the south. And the Ukrainians need just to cut one road, and this is going to be disaster. And the Russians understand this well, and to avoid the situation, currently the Russians are trying to establish control over the eastern, the most farthest eastern part of Avdiivka. We're talking about the company stronghold that located to the south of Kupyansk. And if the Russians, and this is the reason they're trying to move along the central part to this area, they want basically to cut supply of the Ukrainians in this area by taking these, let's say, residential territories, by taking this hill. And if they can do this, if they can capture, they can cut the supply of the eastern part, and then they will start the ground operation by storming this area from many sides. And if the Russians are able to establish control over Kupyansk, of course, this will allow the Russians to achieve a stable, secured supply road of Russian forces in the central part of Avdiivka. So by taking this territory, let's add this possible, let's say, territory map. By taking this territory, the Russians will secure their central part, their supply roads, their reinforcements road, and there's going to be no problem to continue and to finish the battle for Avdiivka itself. So that's why we need to understand that the victory of Avdiivka operation lays not in the western part, not along industrial Ave. This is very important to create a cauldron, but not to win. To win, the Russians need to control either industrial Ave and to restore control over the eastern flank, over this stronghold to the south of Kupyansk, if they want to avoid the encirclement of themselves. So now this is the checkmate, this is the very interesting game, and now the brains, the general brains, the will, the spirit, either of the Russians or Ukrainians, will determine who's going to win the battle for Avdiivka. So we'll see what is going to be next, but once again, I'll repeat one more time that during the day we haven't received almost anything from this area, which confirms that the clashes has just started from both sides. Now we are moving further to the line of combat contact. According to information we have, the Russians continue advancing in further movements in direction of the central part of Pervomaiska. We have adjusted the map, showing the Russian progress in the gray zone. According to most of the mappers, this territory is either under Russian control as well, yet we haven't received even a single geolocated confirmation of that, but probably soon we're going to receive them. When talking about South Donetsk-Marinka area, we have the further Russian progress and further Russian attempts to attack in direction of Pobeda. Today, the Russians published the video of bombings of Ukrainian positions in the vicinity of Pobeda. This is something like artillery preparation before the next attempts to attack in direction of the village. This is very important direction because, as we discussed, the Russians need to bypass Pobeda within the next 2-3 weeks, because currently the Russians continue advancing in Novomykhailivka, and according to most of the mappers, without any geolocated confirmations, the Russians managed to restore control over the southern part, over the cemetery and the farms, and that means that they have already bypassed around 30% of the village, and it's the last part, let's say, left, and obviously the Russians will complete the battle for Novomykhailivka within the next 2-3 weeks, and by the time the Russians force the Ukrainians to step back to Paraskoyevka and enter the western edge of the village, they need to bypass Pobeda as well, and to get something like this the next defense belt on the north of Konstantinov. So this is like synchronized operation, and they need to be like feet to shoulder to shoulder, the northern direction and, let's say, Novomykhailivka direction. And of course not just Novomykhailivka, not just bypass Pobeda, not just bypass Novomykhailivka. Also, the Russians, by the time the Russians capture the village of Novomykhailivka, they need to get the stronghold to the west on the southeast of Vadiana. And today we got additional update from different mappers that the Russians, as a result of offensive operation, managed to establish control over additional fields on this direction as well. So something like this. So once again, by the end of Novomykhailivka battle, by the time the Russians get the western edge of Novomykhailivka, the Russians from the north need need to bypass Победа and to get at least this line. This is like a part of plan. The Russians, by the time the finish of Battle of Novomykhailivka, need to get at least to this line in Vodiane direction. So if the Russians are able to complete these two things, like Novomykhailivka, Победа, and Vodiane, then this is going to be complete disaster and complete collapse of the Ukrainian defense in the cities like Konstantinovka, Paraskovyevka, Vodiane, and Ugledar itself. This is going to be complete collapse and abandoning of significant number of positions from the Ukrainian side and running away in direction of Kurakhova and Vremivka tactical bridgehead. So very interesting tactical operation we are following right now. So we'll see how this battle is going to finish. Obviously 2-3 weeks. Furthermore, we got very interesting details from the Ukrainian sources. The Ukrainians published like the railways. There is like a biggest defense belt ever made by trains. There is like two cities like Volnovakha and there is like Olenivka, let's say, and along this entire railway the Russians established 2,100 trains, like the cargo, let's say this part with cargo, and this is like something like 2,100 trains. Imagine yourself, there is like satellite images of this, and this is something like a natural barrier that the Russians were building in case if Ukrainians had some success and progress during the summer counteroffensive operation. Now we are moving to Zaporozhye area. We have significant reports from Robotyne itself. We have already discussed in the previous video that the Russians very likely established control over this territory as a result of counteroffensive operation. Also, we had geolocated videos from the Ukrainian side that we already discussed about another Russian attempt to attack and how the Ukrainians managed to destroy a few Russian personal armored carriers and tanks. And based on those two videos, we made a conclusion that the Russians currently try to establish control over this territory and, let's say, to increase their positions in the vicinity of Robotyne and to capture Robotyne itself. And right before I start making the video, the sources reported that the Russians launched a very massive and very biggest artillery preparation, and the sources on the ground are saying that the Russians are bombing Robotyne as the Ukrainians were bombing Robotyne during the Ukrainian greatest counteroffensive. So very likely tomorrow or day after and Tuesday we start receiving updates of clashes inside the village itself. Furthermore, during the day the Russians were bombing and attacking the Ukrainian trenches to the south, also making some preparations before further attacks. So the battle for Robotyne entered the next phase, the phase of the ground operation. And the question is why the Russians took a decision to attack Robotyne right now. And there are a few explanations, and the first explanation is that it's like the plan of the Russians to, let's say, to reduce the progress of Ukrainian forces during the summer counteroffensive. And the second reason is that we saw the video from Avdiivka direction with the fresh forces. And according to some sources, very likely that Ukrainians have redeployed forces and fresh battalions exactly from Orekhov, because there are no activity. Furthermore, another important thing, for the first day in a row, the Russians are not reporting about Robotyne and Zaporozhye area in their Ministry of Defense report. And we know that there are a lot of forces. There are 22nd, 3rd Mechanized, 65th, there are 117th, 118th, 133rd, and many other brigades used to be there due to the battle of, due to the Ukrainian counteroffensive operation. And now, as I understand, the Ukrainians took a decision to use reserves and forces exactly from this direction. And this is the main reason why the Russians launched counteroffensive, because of two reasons. First of all, either there are no Ukrainians anymore, they moved the reserves to Avdiivka, and the Russians got the window of opportunity to attack Robotyne and to restore control and to start pressure in direction of Orekhov. This is the first explanation. And the second explanation is that the process of regrouping is taking place right now, and the Russians, by attacking Robotyne, try to pin down the Ukrainians to freeze reserves and not to allow the Ukrainians to redeploy, but to force them to use on Robotyne direction. So maybe this is the second reason why the Russians started their offensive in direction of Robotyne. When talking about Vremivka tactical bridgehead, we don't have anything new, so we have discussed everything. When talking about Bakhmut, Artyomov's direction, we have more updates from this territory. The Russians published a few more geolocated strikes against the Ukrainian forces along the railways, which confirms that the Ukrainians still have presence in this area, still have some positions. That was some regular FPV drone hunting without any development on the ground. The same story about Bogdanovka, a few more additional video of FPV drone bombings, which confirms the Ukrainian control over the central part. And we have the video of how the Russians were sending reinforcements to Popovo forest, probably to reinforce reinforce their positions and to repel upcoming Ukrainian counterattacks. We have already discussed about the Chasiv Yar, that the Ukrainians have already announced about the evacuation, but once again I repeat my idea. Most of the military experts are saying that the Russians are planning to move further to Chasiv Yar. This is not going to happen because we discussed there are very powerful and big stronghold of Ukrainian forces. There are, to be more precise, two of them. The first defense belt is this one, that Ukrainians left the previous defense belt and entered this one, and obviously the Russians gonna need lots of time, probably up to let's say 40 days to penetrate this defense belt. And even if the Russians are able to penetrate this defense belt, then they're gonna face the second, even bigger defense belt that goes starting somewhere at Kalinovka, includes the territory of the forest, canal, and the second forest to the south that located to the northeast of Ivanovsk. So two defense belts, very powerful ones, and very likely the Russians will not even try to attack this territory, and they will try to bypass this area from the south and from the north. And to bypass this territory from the south and from the north, first of all, the Russians need to handle with Ivanovskaya. And today we continue receiving more and more updates about the further Russian progress, about the further Russian plans to storm the village, the forest to the north, and the most important updates that confirms my theory are coming from the N30 road and N32 road. Today we continue receiving more and more updates of FPV drone strikes against the Ukrainian reinforcement, reserves, support supply that goes through N32. More FPV drone strikes, more machines, more cars, more tracks, more light vehicles were damaged and destroyed. So this is the main thing. The Ukrainians this is their weakest point. They have few supply roads, and this one is the main one, and this main supply road is under complete Russian FPV drone control. And we have Russian progress and Russian attacks of Kamerton Akhmat forces from the south, from Chernobyl's area, and now we're gonna see or include the attacks of Russian 98th division from the north. And the battle for Ivanovsk will allow the Russians, if they are able to establish control over the village, to bypass the main stronghold of the Ukrainians in Canal and to continue their offensive operation to Chasiv Yar from the south by bypassing the main defense belt. So something like this, maybe something like this we are going to see within the next few months, not even weeks, obviously. About Klishchiivka, we have additional Russian progress according to some mappers on the Russian side of the railways. The situation in Klishchiivka and Andreevka without any changes. Belogorovka, we haven't received any updates during the previous 24 hours. As we discussed, according to the mappers, the Russians entered the first street of the village without any geolocated video confirmations. At Tirny area, we have just report about further Russian progress in direction of the Zherebets River without any more updates or any changes on the ground. Sinkovka, the same story. The only report we got during the day is about the Russian offensive operation that took place from Orlyanka, Yagidny in direction of Ivanovka, and according to unconfirmed resources, the Russians managed to penetrate the Ukrainian defense belt somewhere here, and they're trying to attack Stepovo-Novosilovka from the north. The Russians are saying that they managed to, Russian army has advanced to a depth of up to a kilometer and the width up to 1,005 kilometers. So according to the Russians, the distance is something less probably of attack, something like this. This is the width, 100.6 kilometers, and something like this to the north. Not very big, but the main purpose is to bypass the village of Ivanovka from the north and to attack Stepovo-Novosilovka. So something happens here, is happening there. We're going to receive updates in the future. We haven't received anything from Sinkovka. The only video that Uday died, if you remember that warrior, he disappeared for a very long time, and now he appeared once again in Lyman Первый in the forest. He published significant number of videos of FPV drone strikes and coordination of Russian artillery in the forest between Sinkovka and Lyman Первый. So the Russians, according to him, continue advancing inside of the forest, trying to bypass and to get, let's say, Kupyansk from the north and to encircle probably Sinkovka and to cut Sinkovka from supply and support. This is the perfect solution for the Russians because they will be hidden from the Ukrainian forces by the forest. When talking about other reports, I would like to discuss with you in the end of the video a few more interesting things. Not interesting, it's a tragedy things, it's critical things for Ukrainian society and so on. Today we start receiving massively the reports about the death of women killed in the combat line. All of them are very young. Some of them were born in 1998, so very young women. We got two more updates about two more girls that were died in Ukraine. One of them is 2001 birth age, the second one 1993. So we start receiving significant number of women death and in Avdiivka in battle for this village, and obviously we're going to receive more and more. Furthermore, we got another video with a person with disability who was continue fighting in the Ukrainian army. The Ukrainians continue laughing at him and joking at him, and he really believes that he fights for Ukraine. So we see that very big mass is happening in the Ukrainian army. Furthermore, today we have from Ukrainian side confirmed case that's about one person also in Ukrainian army. The commissioner from human rights in the Radat, Dmitry Lubinets, reported that the man came to the military registration and enlistment office in the Odessa region and immediately ended up in a military unit. He had two epileptic attacks. Both times the doctors were unable to provide qualified assistance to mobilized men, and he died. So the man he brought the papers that he can't serve. They captured him, brought to the military camp, and he died at the same day. So this is Ukraine. Women are dying. People with disabilities are fighting with real weapons, with mortars, with maybe artillery systems. Sick people with different disabilities and issues are dying just at the first days of the service. And we have more updates of mobilization process. And in this video, for example, we can see how locals were trying to protect their men whom the Ukrainian military authorities were trying to capture and to send to military, maybe to Avdiivka, right exactly from the street. And according to this video, the locals managed to protect their man, and they fight for him, and they managed to release him. And this is a very important thing, because we need to understand that currently the special military operation is getting in the face of the heaviest losses from either from the Russian from the Ukrainian side, but mainly from the Ukrainian side. Now we are getting back to flashbacks of Bakhmut of March and April, when the Ukrainians were losing up to 1,000 soldiers per day. Believe me, within the next months we're going to receive significant number of videos of killed people, of surrendered people, of poor quality of the situation, of living roads, of all this mass that we used to see in Bakhmut. And believe me, this video will be stretched over the entire Ukraine, and people will realize within 2 weeks what kind of situation they entered. And at the same time, the Ukrainians adopted the total mobilization law, and we're going to continue receiving more and more videos of this type when Ukrainian authorities will capture just local people on the street and send them to Avdiivka. But I'm trying to say you that because of that fact that the number of such video is going to increase, this is just basic math and statistics and the theory of the situation, that it can happen or not. I don't know how it's in English to say. And the thing is that sooner or later, either a man who should be mobilized and the man who is mobilizing this from authorities, either this or that, will kill each other on the street, and this video will appear in the open source. And this is going to be the breaking moment in Ukrainian special military operation, not on the ground. Sooner or later, people will start striking. And furthermore, I'll remind you that this is the second case about this case. If you remember, just a few days ago, yesterday, we saw the video. We were talking about the video about another meeting in the same part of Ukraine, the western part of Ukraine, Kasmach, when people were fighting with these people, military authorities. And this is the city, if you remember, where locals found a woman and her daughter, who were working on Ukrainian military authorities and were providing information and coordinates of people who can be mobilized. They found that family, and they, as I understand, they bite them or kick them or something like this. So the western part of Ukraine is getting striking, and obviously the war in Ukraine will be finished very soon with revolt, probably from even exactly from the western part. And we have a lot of reasons for this. Furthermore, the Ukrainians continue publishing the video of defense belt along the border with Belarus. So they continue reinforcing, and we'll see what is going to be next. And that's it for today. Military Summer channel reminds you to condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes to my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.